Hi there, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. And today is one of those other forms of rock music. So today we're doing metal. Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I think it's been about 6 weeks since we did an episode of this, mostly because exploring the prog universe, whose episode was pre that alternates with this one, had three in a row of the same band. And it's because it was such a lengthy discography that required more attention than I originally had thought it was going to. So it kind of pushed this back a bit, maybe 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back. So it should have been every month. I think it's missed a couple weeks extra on top of that. So the band we're doing, well, first before we go too far, what we do here on metal is that I choose a metal band, heavy metal band, from either the past or from the present. So basically my dividing line is if it's over 10 years, the band's over 10 years or longer, I put them in the old school, I guess is what you want to call it. If they're 10 years or newer, I do them as the new school. So I alternate these two things so that I'm not just talking about these lengthy, long bands from the past, although today we will be doing that. So today we're going to be talking about arguably the greatest metal band of all time, definitely considered one of the first, if not the first metal band of all time, have influenced just about everybody in the metal genre, all different genres. Their music was quite influential and had a lot of different elements to it. And we're of course talking about Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath, one of my favorite bands, have been in my top 5 favorite bands almost since I discovered them back in the 70s. Once I started branching out from Kiss, they immediately were one of the 4 or 5 bands that I had bought albums from that I was getting into, and they were as high as second place at one point, with only Kiss ahead of them. But now they're now in my group of 8. So they've been in my group of 8 for a long time and are considered one of my greatest favorite bands. And they actually have more masterpiece albums for me, my personal preference, than any other band. So we're going to try to talk about them. They're a little bit about their history. So first of all, they were Earth originally. And then just before they made their first debut album, they changed the name to Black Sabbath. Originally, I would have said this was a heavy blues band. That's where it, I think, was originally going, but it just became more than that. So they're often labeled as the grandfathers or the number one metal band of all time, but they have quite a few elements to their music that aren't metal at all. They've got some heavy blues in their discography. They've got some progressive stuff in their music as well. Got some classical stuff in there. They've even got some pop, hard rock stuff that, especially in the Tony Martin era, there was quite a bit of that. But they also have some screeching metal stuff. But definitely one of the pioneers of doom metal for sure, stoner rock, all those different elements, even a couple of what I would call early speed metal stuff. So sorry, the neighbor next door has decided that rap is more important than Black Sabbath, so he's decided he's going to crank it up and play it. I do apologize for that, but that's sometimes what you got to deal with when you got people that insist on blasting that stuff at you. So I will eventually finish this video, and then I'll put this stuff on, and then he'll bang on my ceiling or on my wall, I guess is the best way to put it. Okay, so we're going to start out now. I've talked a little bit about them. So this band, of course, featuring the original 4 members, which is Ozzy Osbourne, well known. Most people know who he is. He had a fairly successful solo career after he left Black Sabbath. You then have also Tony Iommi, who I think is well known among metal people and maybe some people who follow music, maybe not so much among the general music listener person that listens to music generally might not know who he is. Geezer Butler, of course, the bass player, and I believe he was the early lyricist. Now, there's been some dispute, I believe, between who wrote the lyrics, him or Ozzy, but based on the conversations I've heard from both of them, I would say it's likely him. And then, of course, Bill Ward, who is a really good drummer and, could sing as well. We don't get to hear much of that, but a little bit of it. So the first album that they put out came out in 1970, their debut album, and I do not know where it is. I know I owned it at one point. I had it on vinyl for sure, and I'm pretty sure I had it on CD, but I do not know what I've done with it or where it's gone. Somebody may have borrowed it and just not returned it, so I'm going to have to replace it anyways. The iconic house and the iconic witch in the front, well known by most metal people, I think. This album is more bluesy, but it has a real doomy, dark feel to it as well. And it's got a few kind of heavier metal songs too, like NIB, which is kind of bouncy, and The Wizard, of course, in there, and then the opening track, Black Sabbath, fantastic tune. For some reason, though, I never made this album a masterpiece. I think I just found it kind of slow and maybe not produced, not great production, maybe not as memorable as some of the other stuff. So it just never quite made it up to that level. But definitely it could in the future if I could get it back and listen to it some more. The second album came out September the 18th, 1970. Paranoid. This is considered by many to be their magnus opus, their big album, the album that people most know. It still gets a lot of attention, especially War Pigs. That's a song that a lot of people say is one of the great doom metal songs of all time. But then you have Iron Man as well, which had its notoriety come back when Iron Man, the movie, and Marvel used it as the theme song for the Iron Man movie. Understandable. Another really heavy track. And then, of course, Paranoid is on this album, which is, I think, probably their most well-known radio staple song for sure. But there's a lot of really deep stuff on the deep cut album stuff on this as well. Stuff like Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom, and Jack the Stripper, Fairies Wear Boots if you prefer. Really, really good deep cut stuff. I personally like Electric Funeral and Planet Caravana. Those are the two that I listen to, that I like to hear the most now. It's funny, in the time period when I first got this, I didn't like either of those two songs, but they've grown on me. Cover Withstanding, this is a great album. I don't really care for this cover. It's kind of weird, kind of stupid actually, but anyways, the album itself, though, fantastic. A lot of people love this album. I can see why. It's got everything you can imagine and more on it. Every song is good. So Black Sabbath's Paranoid. Then they moved on to what I consider to be their best early album for sure, Black Sabbath's Master of Reality. This is a great album, really heavy for the time period, I think. Like, really doomy metal. There's some speed metal on here with After Forever. You've got a little bit of that acoustic stuff like Orchid and just Children of the Grave, one of the great classic heavy metal songs, just crunches along here. Lord of the World, very underrated. Lord of this World, sorry, very underrated. And Into the Void, another good. Solitude is probably currently my favorite Black Sabbath song, I think. And I didn't like it at the beginning, but I've grown to like it. But there's no bad tracks on this. This is a complete, almost near perfect album, if you ask me. If you take out the little Embryo and Orchid, then it's absolutely perfect, I think. So great third album. Came out August the 6th, 1971. And of course, it's at this point, you're getting the same four guys making all these albums. When it changes, I'll let you know at that point. But up until this point, it's the same four that I've already mentioned here. Next out of the gate is their fourth studio album, September of 1972. We're talking about Black Sabbath Volume 4. This album doesn't get as much notoriety as the previous two. However, it's a great album. 10 songs on it. Lots of kind of bluesy stuff here. Some heavy stuff like Supernaut and Tomorrow's Dream. Cornucopia. But then you got a little bit of that acoustic stuff too, like Laguna Sunrise. Under the Sun is very good. Changes is kind of their attempt to make this kind of ballady like song, but ballad according to Black Sabbath's a little bit different than a lot of other bands would be. Wheels of Confusion, which starts this off really heavy, really good. So you got a lot of the psychedelic stuff, but you also got a lot of bluesy stuff here and some heavy metal. So they're not I don't think Black Sabbath thought of themselves as a heavy metal band. They were not adverse to trying all kinds of different stuff. They were actually kind of very progressive in a lot of ways. So that's their fourth album. The next album out of the gate comes out 1973. This is okay, I see what I did. So this came out in November 1973, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. One of their better covers, just really demonic, but you also have on the inside of the cover, you have the angel side of the thing. So you've got this, he's going to heaven or he's going to hell, one or the other. We don't know which one, right? Anyway, this is a very different type of album compared to the predecessor, but to be honest, each of their first four albums sound not totally alike, and this one continues that trend. This has some real heavy songs on it. It also has quite a bit of non-heavy stuff, some stuff like Fluff and National Acrobat. Who Are You? Another kind of synthesizer-driven song. I believe Sabracadabra is the one that Rick Wakeman played keyboards on this. Really good. Looking for Today and Spiral Architect, really solid songs. There's no bad tracks on this album again. It has a mix of stuff like Sabbath Bloody Sabbath and Killing Yourself to Live, which is really heavy, and then you've got other stuff that's more acoustic oriented, some stuff that's kind of almost poppy sounding at times, but really well put together. I think this whole album is one of their stronger ones, and maybe in some ways the end of a bit of an era for them. They starting to change at this point. So the next album out is one that I've recorded on CD and owned, but I never really overplayed it. I haven't played it excessively. I just got it not too long ago. I think it's a really strong album. I think it'll end up being very strong with me, and that's Sabotage. It's funny how they go from such an awesome cover like this to such a weird, this is a really strange cover, you know. Look at the clothing on Bill Ward. What is he thinking with those red pants? And what is Ozzy doing at all? I don't get it. Yeah, kind of an odd cover. I didn't really care for it at all. The music, though, is a little heavier on this than some of the predecessors. You've got Symptom of the Universe, which is fantastic. Am I Going Insane? I like this. It's not too bad. But overall, I'm still just learning about this album. And this was released on July the 8th, 1988. 1975. 88. I don't know where I got that from. Yeah, and you've got, of course, all your original members. They're all still here. Pretty strong album. It's a little bit heavier. I don't find there's as much variety on this as the predecessors. There tends to be more of a similar sound on most of the songs. Some of them a little bit more, some a little bit less, but a little bit more monotone, I guess might be the word for it. But still a great album. Then we get to their 7th studio album, which was released October 1976, Technical Ecstasy. Yeah, this is kind of a strange cover. Is To me, this is basically two robots. Is this two robots procreating? Are they having sex here? Is that what's going on? I don't know. It's weird though. So then you have, this is a little bit more poppy. They're almost like going commercial here. A little more poppy than their predecessors. I don't think it's as good an album as those either. Again, this is one that I didn't own when I was young. I only got this in recent years, so I'm not as familiar with it as some of the others. But that's the feeling I get off of it when I listen to it. It does have some interesting tracks. It's not a bad album by any stretch, but it's hardly a heavyweight like Master of Reality was when in its time period, or even Volume 4. So, but still not a bad album. Next up is their 9th studio album, I believe. No, sorry. That was their 7th. This is their 8th. This is an album that has a lot released. First of all, it was released September 29th, 1978. Never Say Die. It's had a lot of kind of discussion about whether it's a good album or a bad album. Some people really don't like it. A lot of Sabbath fans don't like it. And then there's people that really do like it. I tend to fall in the like it a lot category. It was one of the first Sabbath albums I ever bought. I really like some of the tracks on here. They're among my favorites. But over time, I kind of see the point of view that the people who don't like it are making here. It seems disconnected in some ways. It's thin, a little bit on the thin side. It seems rushed at points. And the album cover kind of isn't really something that doesn't really make any sense, really. You've got a Never Say Die, and then you've got a couple of guys in combat uniforms standing in front of a plane. I think that's a plane. It just, I don't know, I don't get it, but yeah, well, it is a plane because you can see it here on the back. So it has 9 tracks. The poppy kind of attempts at radio play with Never Say Die and A Hard Road. I do like those 2 songs. I just think that was their intent. It was kind of, they were trying to go the same place that they went with Technical Ecstasy, but this one's actually a little bit harder. Johnny Blade is a fantastic track, one of my favorites. Junior's Eyes, I liked it a lot more when I was younger. I don't care for it as much. Shockwave's pretty good. Air Dance is okay. Over to You, Could Live Without. Breakout, not memorable. And then Swinging the Chain, the only thing about this track that I like is it's different because Bill Ward does the actual vocals on this particular track, which I think is kind of interesting. It's funny that he did the vocals on the very last track on the very last album that Ozzy Osbourne was part of, at least his first time around. So yeah, not a bad album, but I like it, but I know that there's plenty out there who don't care as much for it. So then we move on. So this is where it starts to change a little bit. So this next album was released in April. I believe it was April 18th, 1980. So we got one change here. Ozzy's gone now. He's gone off to do his solo career with his Blizzard of Oz, and actually he wore his Blizzard of Oz shirt when he was on the Never Say Die tour. So yeah, he was planning on leaving before he even got finished the tour. So of course, Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell is my favorite Black Sabbath album, although it's been challenged in recent years by a few of the other ones. But it was my introduction to albums by Black Sabbath. Before that, it was just songs here and there, but this was my first album by them. I bought it in 1980 when it came out. Great album. I love this photo part here that is drawing of them. Really well done. I'm not even sure who the artist is. I didn't see anything on it, but it's really good. This album was produced by Martin Birch, the first of 2. This one sounds quite a bit different than the one that comes next too. So this one is heavy, crunching. It's got some nice sounds to it and some really solid songs. Among my favorite songs are on this album. Neon Nights was probably my first favorite Black Sabbath song. It's just pounding, it's crunching. Ronnie James Dio sounds fantastic here, and that's the other change. Dio comes in and takes over vocals, but you still have Bill Geezer and Tony Iommi on this band. I don't mind the album cover, it's okay. A little bit different. Children of the Sea was a song that I really loved a lot. I don't listen to it as much. Lady Evil was a funny song. I liked it initially for about a couple weeks, and then I never really followed it after that. I'm not really sure why that. Heaven and Hell, I think, is overplayed, but it's still a good track. I think it could have made it a couple minutes shorter and got rid of some of that dragging stuff, especially what they like to do it in concert. The flip side, Wishing Well and Die Young, I love these two tracks. They're probably now my two favorite tracks on the album. They weren't in the time period, but especially Die Young wasn't. But it's really a strong, heavy, pounding song, and there's a lot of that, higher, faster paced music, more up to date music than they did in the 70s. And then the last two tracks, Walk Away and Lonely Is the Word, I don't think they're as good as they once were. And of course it's a Martin Birch production, so it sounds pretty decent. This album sounds much better though as far as the production goes, and I didn't like this album nearly as much as Heaven and Hell when they around that time period at the beginning. So the album is first of all Sabbath's Mob Rules, which was released November the 4th, 1981, and I didn't like it as much, but I still liked it a lot. And I was really disappointed to find out that Dio was going to leave shortly after this. I thought that's the end of Sabbath. What's the chances of them having a third great vocalist? I didn't think it was possible. Turn Up the Night, of course, is kind of similar to Neon Nights. Voodoo was a song I liked a lot initially, but it kind of faded in time. The two big ones for me here now are Sign of the Southern Cross and Country Girl, which I think are both just absolute killer tracks. The Mob Rules, of course, was in the movie Heavy Metal, which was a favorite movie of mine at the time period. Slipping Away, kind of heavy song, liked it. Fall Off the Edge of the World and Over, maybe a little bit weaker than I originally thought they were. I don't care for them as much as I used to. The album cover is one of Sabbath's best. I have no doubt about that. Try to get up as close as I can. You can see all the detail here. Try to actually maybe on this side might work better. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's just really well done. It's intricate. It kind of, you see the backside too. It kind of reminds me of the artwork on Fair Warning by Van Halen. It's kind of got that similar kind of suggestive feel of what's going on, Anyways, the Mob Rules, and I believe the Mob Rules is their 10th studio album. So their 11th studio album was the end of the road for me for a while. Born Again by Black Sabbath, kind of an interesting cover. Some people absolutely think this is one of the worst covers of all time. I think it's kind of rushed job. It's a weird cover. It wasn't really liked by religious people very much, but I've gotten used to it. I don't mind it. It kind of gives an evil flavor to it, and the album itself is very evil. This may be the most evil of all Sabbath albums, and it's very different sounding. It doesn't sound like anything they did before. It's faster paced. The guitar is more screechy, whiny sounding. It's heavy, but it's heavy in a different way. I mean, you've got some really heavy melodic stuff like Zero the Hero and Born Again and Stonehenge. Well, there's little bits like Stonehenge in the Dark, which are really good. But, you get the big tracks like Trashed and Disturbing the Priest, which I thought were absolutely killer tracks. And then later on, Hotline and Keep It Warm were really strong too. I think Ian's voice is as good as it's ever been on anything. The screaming is off the charts here. Yeah, this is a super album. Um, Again, this came out in September the 12th, 1983, so now you're moving into the 80s, and I would have loved if they had done another album with this guy. I think this album's very murky. Doesn't have the best of quality, and I don't know what went wrong. There was a problem with the recording. But I think if they had done another one, it would have come out maybe differently. But still, the tracks are fantastic. Next up are the Tony Martin era albums. So I'm going to go over these ones fairly quickly because I'm not as familiar with them as I am with the ones I did. So the next one up was it came out in '86, January the 28th, Seventh Star. This was originally supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo album, but the record label, I guess, decided that it would sell better as a Black Sabbath song album than as a Tony Iommi album. This features Glenn Hughes on vocals, very different sounding from Dio or Ozzy. Dave Spitz on bass here. And I did forget to mention, too, that Ian Gillan was the vocalist here, and Bill Ward came back for this album, but he was not on this album. Vinny Appice took over for the drums on this album. So I did forget to mention those, so I thought I would make sure I backtracked a bit. Jeff Nichols is credited on this album, and he's played on most of the Black Sabbath stuff since the late 70s. He's gone now, but he was the keyboardist on this album. But there's often not a ton of work for him, but there are some parts that he does. Eric Singer of Kiss, I think is he the one from Kiss, or am I thinking of a different singer? I think it's the one in Kiss, yeah. So, and you can hear it in his drumming. It's very Kiss sounding. David Spitz on bass, of course, and then Glenn Holmes on vocals. Glenn is very strong vocalist, but clean sounding, very different sounding than either of Ozzy or Dio or even Ian Gillan. He doesn't sound like any of them. This is a little bit more darker album, I think. And then of course it's because it's their 12th studio album at this point in time. This is the beginning of that kind of poppy stuff they're doing. I say poppy compared to the other Sabbath, but really it's like hard rock. It's a hard rock album as opposed to anything that you might call metal. And it stands out here a little bit because the three predecessing albums, Born Again, The Mob Rules, and Heaven and Hell, were among their heaviest albums. So you can notice a bit of a drop off here with the music. Yeah, a little bit more subdued as well. Then the next album come out in November of 1987, The Eternal Idol. This is the first one featuring Tony Martin on vocals. Nichols is back. Daisley plays bass here. Singer is back playing on this album. Bev Bevlin also playing some percussion here. Ray Gillan playing some lead on Nightmare on the deluxe edition, and Spitz again playing some bass there on that as well. I think the vocals are smooth. The range, similar range to the previous album, but I think Martin at this point sounds a little less like Hughes and a little bit more like maybe Dio. It's a hard rock album. I think it's got a lot of similarity to the previous album. I think this album might be a little bit heavier. The next album, Headless Cross, April the 17th, 1989. So 1989 was when it was made. You got Martin, Iommi, and Nichols, and then they're joined by Cozy Powell on the drums and Lawrence Cottle on bass. Also, this is their 14th studio album at this point. Brian May plays on here. He does the solo in one of the songs, When Death Calls. It's a heavier album, I think, overall than the previous ones. The previous two, anyways. More smooth, more melodic. And just, it seems like this one is heading a little bit more towards a sound that they want. The other two previous ones, Eternal Idol, especially the Seventh Star, which was a massive different musicians, and then you kind of stabilizing a bit with the second one, like Eternal Idol, and then by the time you get to Headless Cross, they've started to kind of coalesce and get a sound going here again. The next album out is Tear. I think this is one of the better of that era of albums. August the 20th, 1990. Iommi, Martin Powell, Neil Murray takes over bass here. Some dark sounds here. The vocals are clear, strong. You can hear he's got a little bit more of that Dio going on here than he did on the previous ones. I think this is a very similar album to Headless Cross, but maybe a little bit more cleaned up. Then you get to this album, which I also own, Dehumanizer. This was in my playlist not too long ago. This is a very good album. Released in 1992, bringing back Geezer Butler for this, as well as Vinny Appice and Ronnie James Dio. So this is the Mob Rules guys all back together doing an album. And this is a strong album. It's heavy. Dio's voice is strong here. I think it's catchy as hell. I do like it a lot. Maybe not as much as the Mob Rules or Heaven and Hell, because I have a lot more history with them. It was on my playlist for a while. I do like it quite a bit. Next album up is Cross Purposes. So now Dio and Appice are gone again. Cross Purposes. So you got Martin back in the fold here. Iommi, Butler, Nichols, and Bobby Rondinelli comes in here and plays the drums, replacing Vinny Appice here. This is more of a metal sounding album, but it does have a poppy feel to it as well. I think this is the album that I think Martin sounds the most like Dio on. Definitely has a little bit of that going on. This is also their 17th studio album. So their next studio album, or their 18th studio album, released June the 5th, 1995. It's called Forbidden. I think it has the best cover. It's kind of a Grim Reaper cover to it. Iommi, Martin Powell is back here. Murray's back here, and Nichols are playing on this album as well. This is a very commercial sounding hard rock metal album. Yeah, it definitely has that kind of really commercial sounding. I think it's the most commercial of any of their albums, really, but especially of the Tony Martin era ones. But it's not a bad album. I don't think they have a bad album, to be honest. I can't. Maybe the Technical Ecstasy might be a bit of a weak. I don't really care much for the Seventh Star. I know some people like it, but it's a little bit different. I don't really think of it as a Sabbath album, really. And then they had a huge hiatus that went on for about 18 years or so, and then they came back and they brought Ozzy back into the fold. I'm just going to grab the album here off of my playlist. So this one is the one that's currently in my playlist, 13, which came out June the 10th, 2013, featuring Ozzy back in the fold, Iommi and Butler as well. Brad Wilkes is brought in to just play the drums. It would have been nice if Bill could have came back. He wanted to come back, but it was a couple years after this, and they just didn't want to go there anymore. I think they're probably done now, but if they did do another album, I wouldn't be unhappy at all. So this is their 19th and final studio album. I like it quite a bit. So it's a 2 CD set here. So you've got, I was trying to take one of the albums out so you can see what it looks like. It's a nice cover. It's kind of a spacey, psychedelic look to the album. And the other disc is the same. Pretty heavy. It does have a lot of original Sabbath sounds to it. But lots of guitar riffing, which is dominant. I think Ozzy sounds pretty good on this album. They probably cleaned up his voice quite a bit for it, but he sounds pretty good. And the second CD, which has Methodemic, Peace of Mind, and Pariah, I think these are strong second discs to me. But I've seen this with Yes, and now I've seen it with Sabbath, where they have basically 2 discs that they could have put everything on 1 disc. I'm not really sure why they did that. Maybe they sold this as a deluxe edition. I'm not sure. There's the inside of it. Nice. It's actually a very good album. I think it was a nice return for them, a nice return for Black Sabbath and for Ozzy Osbourne. I wish it would have been nice if they started and just built on this, but I guess they got tired of it. Now, or maybe they don't wanna, or maybe they just didn't want to get back into what they had, because they had lots of issues with drugs and stuff like that early on, and maybe they didn't want to go there again. So, not really sure, but that's it. So, Black Sabbath here for metal today. I know it's been a bit of a longer one. They have a fairly lengthy discography, but to me, it's one of the best discographies because there's no, unlike a lot of bands that have at least one or two really terrible albums, they have nothing like that. There's nothing terrible. There's a couple of albums that are not that strong, but they're not bad albums, and I love most of their stuff quite a bit. So there you are for metal for this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Will actually come out at 11 o'clock tonight, so I hope that you get a chance to watch it. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons, as they help me quite a bit. And any comments about the discography or anything that you think would be a nice addition to the video for people who are interested in knowing more about the band. And don't forget to hit the notification bell, as that will give you a reminder of when the next video is out. And take care, and we will see you then. Have a good one. Goodbye.